Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, What to Consider When Hiring an Associate. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that there's a chat feature for this webinar, and you can ask your questions at any time during the presentation. The chat button is at the bottom of the PowerPoint as you hover over it. We will answer all the questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A portion, but feel free to ask questions via chat as you think of them. Our presenters today are Matt Vanderloo and Amanda Falkowski. Matt is a CPA and principal, and Amanda is a practice consultant with SVA's Dental Services Group. They provide advisory, accounting, and tax services to dentists and their businesses. They work with dental practices of all sizes, from solo practices to group practices with multiple locations. Matt and Amanda use their knowledge of the dental industry to help dentists on many aspects in their practices, including our topic today, hiring an associate. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt to get started.
Thanks, Jen. We're really excited to be here today and have all of you listening in and joining us online. Lots of great things to talk about today. We've done a series of webinars, all dental related, on all sorts of different fun tax and accounting issues, consulting issues, practice management and valuation, buying and selling. And today is the latest in that, and we're excited to have Amanda here, one of our newest team members here at SVA, join us to share some of her expertise on bringing associates into practices. So it's going to be a great presentation. We have lots and lots of material, so we're going to have to go through as quickly as we can to make sure we cover everything we wanted to cover today. So today we're going to talk about some key factors you need to consider if you're thinking about hiring and bringing a new associate into your practice, some of the different employment options you have for the associate, how you might want to think about compensating the associate once they're part of your practice, some really important things you need to think about in terms of protecting your practice as you bring a new associate in, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how to cut the pie that exists in your practice. So with all of that, I think our first thing today, we want to just think a little bit about an average dental practice and what that looks like, and then we're going to use that as a jumping off point to talk about when it might be, your average dental practice might be growing to the point where it's time to bring in that associate. So we typically, for a typical average practice we see with one dentist working in the practice, that one owner dentist practice, on average see about $1 million in collections, $600,000 in overhead expenses, and then $400,000 of profit on the bottom line. Those overhead expenses don't include any compensation paid out to the dentist, so really that $400,000 is the bucket of money we've got to pay out to the dentist who's running that practice, working in that practice. That's just kind of the average. We see a pretty big range there on the collection side. On the low end, somewhere maybe around $700,000 of collections, up to, on the high end, maybe $1.6 million of collections. That'd be a practice maybe a little bit heavier into cosmetic work, maybe a bigger perio practice, but a pretty big practice for a one dentist owner. One of the most frequent questions we get asked by a more experienced, code word for maybe a little bit older dentist as they're getting a little bit longer into their career is, and I'm going to turn over to Amanda and let her reveal what that big question is.
When should you know whether or not you should hire an associate? There are many factors that go into this, and some may be the right reasons for hiring an associate, and some may be the wrong reason to hire an associate and really maybe step back and take another look at your practice and your goals and objectives before bringing on an associate. Some of the key things to consider when considering whether or not to hire an associate. Do you want to cut back on your workload? Are you currently full-time and maybe you want to cut back to 1 or 2 days as you're nearing retirement? Are you looking for an exit strategy, retirement plan, maybe 1 year, 2 years plus down the road? Or is your practice just so busy that you simply cannot do everything on your own and you need help managing the current patient load and growth that you're experiencing? As I said, there's generally 2 goals in bringing on an associate. One is to relieve that busy patient load and assist with the existing production that exists in your practice. The practice is just too busy and one dentist can't simply take care of the current patient load on their own any longer. And the other is a retirement plan, finding a buyer for your practice to succeed you into retirement. So if you're looking to grow your practice and are years away from retirement, and are simply looking for someone to help grow your practice and handle the current patient base, then a financial security of the associate may not be an issue You may still want to ask about their future plans to get an idea of a potential associate's goals and ambitions, but you can do it in a more big picture kind of way. If you're planning for retirement, you need to consider what your intention is for your practice. If you're seeking someone that will want to eventually buy out your practice, allowing you to slide into retirement, then you may need to make sure that the person you choose is, one, interested in owning their own practice one day, they may or may not, and they're financially able and stable and secure to do so. The closer you are to your retirement goal, the more important that it is that the associate you pick is the right one. Also, the financial security of that associate that you hire becomes more and more important as you near retirement. It's important to be upfront about your goals and ensure that the person you choose to take over is in a good position to do so when the time comes. Consider the possible associate new dentist goals. Oftentimes, they're looking for mentorship both on the clinical side and the business side, networking in the dental community by the study clubs and associations that exist in your community and beyond. Partnership, buy-in, ownership, and eventual buyout are common goals. What dentist practice owners should consider before hiring an associate? Before thinking about adding an associate, you need to do careful financial due diligence and planning to make sure it works for both you and your practice and the new dentist and associate. It's important to understand upfront that adding a new associate requires considerable investment of your time and resources. If you're looking for immediate reduction in work hours or a quick way to sell and transition your practice, this might not be your best option. You need to make sure that your practice will grow and increase profitability by adding an associate. Know and consider these helpful factors to determine if your office is ready to support an associate dentist. Having clearly set goals on your end, being realistic with these goals, doing what is needed to successfully bring on a new dentist in terms of marketing, adding needed staff, investing in CE and training, taking the time to mentor the associate, possible office renovation and/or expansion, and considering what many new dentists are also considering in their search for a new practice opportunity, and having clear and transparent discussions up front and throughout the process can help avoid common misunderstandings, confusion, associate turnover, and provide a win-win scenario for both parties. The new associate. So do the owner's goals match up with the associate's goals? Having a clear understanding of your own goals and transparent discussion to the potential new dentist to be sure both parties' goals align helps reduce and hopefully eliminate any misunderstandings, confusion, and possible turnover due to a bad fit or lack of understanding or knowing each other's goals. New dentists have high student debt, over $300,000 plus, I've heard as high as $450,000 plus, and their need to work full-time at a fair compensation is something that is very important when they're seeking an opportunity and making sure that it's a worthwhile and doable opportunity for them. They can work possibly part-time in two practices, but certainly full-time is needed for these new dentists. Educating them of the compensation and income potential of being a future partner and owner is key.
So one of the first factors we really like to consider is kind of the growth trend of the practice. So as we think back to that average practice we were talking about that has $1 million in collections, I think typically if we see a mature practice collecting about $1 million, that practice is going to be picking up at a minimum somewhere between 15 and 20 new patients every month at a minimum, just to maintain that practice and keep it at that $1 million level. Probably has at least at a minimum 1,800 active patients in the practice, might have as many as 2,000 active patients. And depending on, if it's a general, those are good numbers to use for a general dentist practice. If you've got a specialty practice, those numbers are going to change a little bit, and there'll be some different metrics we look at. Another thing we might look at is your hygiene schedule, and we want to see hygiene out probably 4 to 6 weeks before we think about bringing in a new associate to start taking things over. So as we look at growing that practice from one dentist to two dentists, at a minimum we want the current dentist in the practice to be producing consistently $90,000 of production a month. That's going to translate to almost $1.1 million in production on an annual basis. We need that at a minimum to make sure we're busy enough to be able to support a second dentist. And instead of just that 15 to 20 new patients a month, we need to be up around 40 or 50 new patients a month, because we need enough new patients to support the existing dentist in the practice and enough new patients that new associate who comes in is going to have some growth and be able to grow their practice to that $1 million level. If we don't have that kind of growth in the practice and that kind of new patient acquisition, we're going to have some potentially negative consequences, or at least consequences we need to be aware of going into it. We'd then be in a position where we're probably going to look at the owner share of the profit declining in the practice, so some sort of a pay cut for the existing owner, or we're going to have an associate in the practice who's not going to be busy and is going to have a lot of idle time in the practice. And maybe then we're in a position where we need to look at a part-time associate. So instead of having somebody come in on a full-time basis, come in and work a reduced schedule or a limited schedule for a period of time until they can get some new patients under their belt, so to speak, and really be ready to go on a full-time basis. So from a number standpoint, those are some of the important things to look at. What are some of the other things we need to consider, Amanda, that aren't maybe as financially driven?
Sure, and I just want to add to that on the part-time basis. Oftentimes what starts as a part-time associate will quickly grow to full-time in short time with the proper planning, systems, and strategies put in place. Some key factors to consider would be to make sure that you're involving the team in this. Involving the team and informing them in the plans to hire an associate dentist. Without their involvement, the team may resent the new arrangement, and the new associate may have points stacked against them before even starting. And all too often, it is a downhill process from there, even if you've made a great hire. Explain to them that due to the growth of the practice and to be able to adequately serve the growing patient base, that you need to add another dentist and grow the team. Discuss the ideal candidate with them, get their feedback, ask for their help, and share that they are an important part in the process in the selection, decision, and onboarding of the new dentist. By involving them in this important process, they will be much more committed to the entire process and welcoming the new dentist and ensuring that he or she works out well. Another thing to consider is the patience for the new dentist. The new dentist will obviously need patience. You'll need to provide the patients to the new dentist from the new patient sources and from existing patient sources in the practice. The associate is also responsible for actively assisting and securing new patients from community involvement, referrals, marketing efforts, etc. Assign all new patients or a percentage of all new patients who did not request a specific dentist to the new associate. New patients brought in by a specific dentist should, if at all possible, be scheduled to that dentist. And as far as patient record ownership, typically the practice owns all of the patient records. Provide access to the patient records that the new associate will see and treat. However, the associate typically is not entitled to general access to all other patient records. Other key factors to consider are referrals. You should have at least 40 to 50% referral rate before adding another dentist. A referral rate any lower than this means that other internal issues need to be fixed before adding an associate. There's no use spending money or marketing if your patients are not staying and referring. If you are not getting a high number of referrals, your patient acquisition cost is too expensive. Fix this referral problem first, or it may just get worse when the associate is added. Case acceptance rates. Case acceptance should be at least 80%. If the owner dentist has a low case acceptance rate, too many patients are not completing their dental treatment. A low case acceptance rate reduces profitability, which makes it very hard to profit from an associate. Associate doctors usually have a lower case acceptance rate than those of more senior experienced doctors. Make sure you have strong systems in your practice. An associate dentist will do what comes naturally to them when communicating with the patients, presenting treatments, scheduling, completing procedures. If you don't have strong systems for how everything operates in your office, your success will be dictated by the associate's natural abilities in these areas, which are often green and are limited and not in tune to strong and efficient and effective systems for business growth yet in their careers. It will be the luck of the draw. Train the new associates on these systems for at least one full week before allowing them to see patients, and then ongoing training and continuing education beyond that. This helps to ensure both the associates and your success. Consider also your physical office space. Ideally, the practice should have no less than 5 doctor chairs and 4 hygiene chairs. This gives each doctor 2 chairs for treatment with 1 shared overflow chair. This also provides 2 columns of hygiene patients for each doctor. If you don't have the physical space for 9 treatment rooms, you need to get creative by adding either days and hours to increase capacity. One option is to do split shifts where the office is open 12 hours per day with each doctor working 6-hour shifts 5 days per week, up to about 30 to 32 clinic hours. For example, a 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then a 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then possibly also adding Saturdays and even weekends I've seen is common. Return on investment. Take into account the return on investment and project the financial outcome of adding an associate for both the practice owner and the new associate. Make sure that you and the new associate are compatible. There are many reasons and factors to consider. It is important to consider your compatibility with your new associate that you'll be working closely with. It's important to consider their skill set, work habits, demeanor, personality, philosophy, and attitude towards patients and patient treatment. Every dentist has their own way of doing things. Take the time to have a serious discussion about what you believe, your philosophies, and then also get the opinions of the potential associate's views of patient care to be assured that they are similar to yours. Ensure that your new associate has the temperament and drive to help build a profitable practice. It won't do you or them any good to bring them on if they won't make the effort to attract new patients and help the practice grow. This is critical that you are on the same page and work at this together. There are several different employment option scenarios. One is hiring the new associate, the new dentist, as an employee dentist. Hiring them as a W-2 employee is a great choice if you want to stay in your practice for a while. It can help you grow your practice without long-term commitments or partnership share of profits. You provide benefits and pay federal and possibly state and local payroll taxes. Make sure you understand the financial responsibilities associated with hiring an associate full-time or part-time as an employee. If you already have employees such as administrative staff, hygienists, etc., you may have a system in place to deal with payroll and taxes, which may make this an option very preferable. The practice furnishes all equipment, materials, auxiliary team staff, employees that are needed to practice. The practice assumes liability from workers' performance, determines working operations and conditions. It's important to have employment agreements that outline your expectations, perimeters, and practice buy-in options. Another option is bringing them on as an independent contractor. If you don't want to hire them on as an employee, consider bringing on a new dentist as an independent contractor. They may provide their own equipment, supplies, staff, employees, and patients. They also oftentimes share office space and resources of your practice. Essentially, they are their own practice within the practice. Independent contractors typically profit from all collection fees for their own services performed. They may pay you a fee for your use of office space, for their use of your office space and resources, plus a mutually agreed upon percentage of their total revenue profits. Benefits and taxes are negotiable, but typically you would not be required to provide benefits and you would not have to worry about payroll taxes since you would not provide them with a 1099, you would provide them with a 1099 form versus a W-2. Practice owner is not responsible for the losses or damages of independent contractors. Clearly establish a contract agreement that guarantees time commitment, shared expenses, rent, plus financial terms. Specific contracts vary greatly, so determine what works best for you. Another scenario is a buy-in partnership. Employment with transition into gradual buy-in and or buyout of your practice. This option might be best if you're hiring someone with the intention of selling your practice to them in the future. The associate could make financial investments into your practice over an agreed period of time with final buyout upon your retirement. A typical contract might require the associate to put a sum of money into your practice as an investment while specifying bonuses and profit-sharing agreements. You may also include a time frame for the buyout of the business as well as specific terms for that buyout. This could be a win-win for everyone if your associate helps grow the practice and has the necessary financial resources to do so. Be sure that you carefully review the associate's financials up front to ensure that a buyout can be met upon transition of your practice.
So then within those three different options as an employee, an independent contractor, a new owner, you've got to think about which option is right for you. And there are pros and cons, pluses and minuses to each different option. And which option you're going to select is really going to have a big impact on how they're compensated as a new associate within the practice, what benefits they may or may not be eligible for, and really their loyalty to the practice overall. Remember, as an employee is going to be a little bit more loyal to a practice than an independent contractor who's going to be more easily able to hop between practices or work for multiple practices at any point in time. And then as an owner, you're going to be more tied in and loyal to a practice than you are as an employee, since you've got some sort of substantial benefit if the practice does well as an owner there. So that really has a big impact. Which choice you make as how you're going to employ the associate has a big impact on how they're going to perform and operate within that practice. And a lot of how you make that decision is going to depend on your goals. How loyal do you want and need that new associate to be to your practice? How much control do you want to have over their compensation in terms of just a base salary or them being able to earn based on how many patients they're seeing in the practice? The specifics of your situation, and really then the other big caveat there is the facts and circumstances, and this is really code for what is the IRS going to see when they look at this whole situation. So as much as you might want to bring somebody in and have them employed as an independent contractor, so not really an employee at all, but just a contractual relationship there, the IRS might look at the situation and decide they're not a contractor, they're not an independent contractor, but they're really an employee and might make you treat them like an employee in terms of payroll tax withholding and income tax withholding and all the fun things that go along with that. So depending on what type, how you think this is going to get structured, it's going to have a huge impact on how that new associate gets compensated. And so an employee is going to be compensated differently than an independent contractor would be compensated, which is going to be compensated different than a new owner in the practice would be. So let's first look at an employee. What we're typically seeing for an employee is some sort of a base salary and then a bonus potential on top of that. That bonus potential might be based on production goals, it might be based on collection goals, but there'll be some sort of bonus potential there. And then as an employee, they'll at some point probably qualify for most of the benefit packages you'd have within the practice. So they at some point would probably qualify for your health insurance, maybe disability insurance, the retirement plan in the office. So as an employee, they get to participate on all of that. And then in a lot of cases, we'll see some sort of an allowance in place for continuing education expenses, dues, other professional expenses. So you might have one bucket of dollars that they have available to spend on all three of those, or three different buckets they'd have available to spend on those specific categories. Remember that with an employee, everything can be negotiated or is negotiated, and everything's going to be contained in a contract. So you're definitely going to want that employment contract in place that spells out what the base salary is, what the bonus is, and how we're going to calculate that bonus, and how often we're going to calculate that bonus and pay it out. Remember, too, that compensation is going to vary greatly depending on experience. A brand new dental school graduate is going to command a lot lower base salary than an associate who has 10 years of experience working in a variety of different practices and comes into your practice really ready to work and work quickly. When you're bringing in that new associate as an employee, we also need to consider how we're handling all the additional overhead expenses that are going to be generated by the practice. The lab expense and supply expense for the new associate, the new hygienist and assistant, the malpractice insurance. Are all those just going to be additional overhead expenses that the practice is covering and paying for, or somehow those getting split with the associate or getting taken into account when we do the bonus calculation for the associate? There's a wide variety of ways that can get handled. We've seen it handled a number of different ways, but you need to think about that on the front end and decide how you want to do that. From a production standpoint, we really need to understand and have an agreement on how we're allocating all the different production. What that the new associate does is really their production, and what's getting allocated in different spots. And specifically here, we need to think about the fee related to the exams, hygiene fees, x-ray fees for the patients that new associate is seeing. Are those going to be included in some sort of a bonus calculation for the new associate, or do those go to the hygienist or somewhere else? And then in terms of trends, what we've really been seeing recently in the last 12 to 18 months is a trend for, especially for new graduates, to look for a higher base salary and a lower potential bonus. They want more guaranteed in that base and less subject to production goals and the bonus. And then in a non-financial sense, we've also seen with new hires, they really want a lot of mentoring, and they want that kind of a relationship with the existing dentist in the practice so they can really learn how to operate efficiently and effectively as a dentist. For an independent contractor, a little bit more simple, really three basic ways we see the independent contractor get compensated: either hourly, based on how often they're in the practice and how much they're doing in the practice. A lot of times we'll see a per diem, so for every day or half day they're in the practice, it's a set dollar amount. And then occasionally we'll also see it formula-based, so based on the production that independent dentist is able to generate on the days they're in the practice, some sort of bonus threshold. And then finally, if you employ them as an owner, that's pretty simple. How are you paid as the current owner? And typically, anybody who comes in as a new owner is going to get paid the same way. There's going to be some sort of a base salary, and then there's usually some sort of a formula that allocates the profit in the practice to the existing owners. Now, that allocation may be equal. It may be based on production. It might be a lot more complex, and each of our expenses get treated and tracked a little bit differently. So there's any number of ways we can allocate profit in a group practice, is what we have here if we have 2 or more owners. So that decision about is that new associate an employee, an independent contractor, an owner really impacts how they're going to get compensated. Amanda, can you walk us through some of the things we need to consider to really protect that practice as we bring in a new associate?
Absolutely. And this is where we typically partner with a trusted attorney resource who has experience in and is well-versed with working with dental contracts. Protecting your practice is very important, and there are many legal aspects to consider. One is that all employees must have a contract. Clearly outline all employment terms, the conditions, compensation. Have this in writing before the associate starts working to alleviate any issues or concerns along the way or on the back end if they were to leave the practice. Negotiate renewal terms based upon the performance and mutual agreements, and this really depends upon your short and long-term goals of your practice. Reasonable notification term is 60 to 90 days. Make sure you have a termination clause that protects both you and your practice should you have to let the associate go or should they leave on their own. And typical renewal terms I see are typically a year, and then anything beyond that based on whether or not they're going to be buying into the practice in the future. Restrictive covenants and non-competes. The associate usually signs the agreement agreeing not to engage directly or indirectly in the practice of dentistry, whether as a proprietor, partner, or employee of another practice within an agreed number of miles from the practice and an agreed amount of time. And this differs depending upon if you're in a city setting, suburban, or rural area. Typically, if it's the city, it's a smaller area, maybe 5 to 10 miles, possibly up to 15. And if it's in a more rural area, that can be expanded greatly. The agreement is different if it's an employee, an independent contractor, or an owner. Either party is usually required to provide a written notice of termination of the employment agreement, and all of this differs in each state, so definitely consider and consult with an experienced attorney that is well-versed in the dental space before creating these contracts. Making sure you legally protect your assets by including a non-compete and non-solicitation stipulation in your associate employment agreement. If your associate decides to leave the practice, make sure that your patients don't leave with them and your employees don't leave with them. This can be common if they formed a good relationship with either of those. Some states don't allow non-compete restrictions, so make sure to, again, consult with a good attorney to find out what your state's specific laws are. Make sure the goodwill of your practice is legally protected. Your practice is based on your reputation and goodwill with your patients in the community, so make sure that you protect that.
The last thing we really wanted to talk about before we wrap up today is the idea of kind of cutting the pie within your practice. So as we think about a practice, we've got a practice that generates a substantial amount of profit every year, and as we bring in a new associate, we start to take the pie that is that practice profit, and instead of all of it being available to the owner to pull out as compensation and benefits, now we've got to look at taking a slice out of that pie for the associate. So as we think, we started off talking about how big does the practice need to be in terms of patients and collections on a consistent basis. Without any increase in the number of new patients that are coming into the practice or how much we're collecting in the practice, we're taking the same size pie and cutting a big slice out and giving it to the associate. So for the owner in an existing practice to be able to keep their share of the pie the same as it was in the past, they really need to find a way to grow the pie. And that's why we really focus on those new patients coming into the practice and helping make sure the practice is growing as we're bringing in the new associate. As we talk about a new associate if we're looking at them as an employee and bringing them in as an employee, and if this is a pretty new graduate, new hire coming in, from a break-even standpoint, if we're paying a $125,000 salary to that new full-time associate, and we look at all the other expenses we're going to bring into the practice with that, the payroll taxes and malpractice insurance and maybe health insurance for the new associate and a CPE allowance. Then we probably need to bring in at least one assistant and pay payroll taxes and health insurance for that new assistant. It adds up pretty quickly and can pretty easily get to be around a $200,000 price tag to bring in a new associate into a practice. So when that new associate comes in, we need them to be able to produce at least $200,000 in collections that first year just to be able to break even and not to be a financial drag on the practice, really. So it's really important to think about positioning yourself and being ready to grow as that new associate comes in so that we can each get the right size piece of pie out of that practice.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Amanda. Again, if you have any questions for either of them, please use the chat feature that is featured in this presentation. We did actually have one that came through during our last half an hour. And this is a question for Amanda. What does the process of hiring an associate exactly look like?
Well, it is a time-consuming effort, and it depends on many factors. It can be a quick or it can take months depending upon your goals, what you're looking for, your practice location, what your practice opportunity has to offer. The candidates that are available at the time that you're looking, timing is everything, and availability of the current selection pool is dependent upon your timing as well. The first step is to determine your goals, as we've discussed, and your needs up front, including what your opportunity is, what you have to offer a new dentist as far as your opportunity, the days, the hours, full-time or part-time. Is it an associateship, an employee, an independent contractor, partner, buy-in, buy-out, the compensation and benefits, the staff you'll have available for them, new patients, patient assignment, marketing efforts, CE, training, mentorship, and why someone should choose to work for you and in your practice versus the many other opportunities available to them. These dentists have many opportunities in front of them, so you definitely want to consider what you have to offer them to attract them to your practice versus the one down the street, for instance, and making sure that it's a great option for them in their career. Once this is all determined and thoughtfully planned out, I have a discussion with the practice owner or whoever you put in charge of hiring to go over all of these factors, how your new dentist hire will be structured to fit into your needs, what we'll do to attract a new dentist, and what you're seeking in the new dentist as far as personality, experience, their philosophy as well as yours, and who might make a good fit with your practice, the ideal candidate. We create together a practice listing description, which includes all of these details about the opportunity, the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, what makes your opportunity unique and attractive to potential dentist candidates. This practice opportunity listing is shared with our deep dental network, including the current dentist pipeline that we have, the dental schools, vendor partners, social media, job listing sites, and beyond. And then I began to talk with interested dentist candidates about the opportunity and see how it would be a good fit for them. All candidates also go through an interview screening process on the front end about an hour long in discussing their goals, their experience, their skill set, their personality, their needs and profile, and what is a good fit for them as far as practice opportunities. And then all will sign a confidentiality non-disclosure agreement to make sure to keep anything that is shared with them about your practice opportunity confidential. If they then are interested in your particular opportunity, I share them with you, including their resume, CV, cover letter, a profile and bio, and any details that I collect in my conversations with them. Beyond that, if there's a mutual interest, introductions are made, interviews are set up, phone calls and in person, and then I advise a minimum of at least 2 meetings to really get a feel for what the dentist is seeking and if that's a match with what your opportunity has, if it's a fit for both parties and you're both compatible. Beyond that, a discussion is made about a possible offer. The offer is made, negotiations on that offer, including compensation, benefits, continuing education, the days and hours that they'd work, non-compete and restrictive covenant, the duration, renewal, buy-in terms, et cetera. And all of this is negotiable by both parties. The mutually agreed upon contract is finalized and signed, and then both parties discuss the start date.
Great. Well, we are now over time. Thank you, Matt and Amanda, again for your presentation today, and thank you, all of you, for joining us today. If we did not answer any of your questions, or if you come up with any in the future, Matt and Amanda's contact information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out to them at any point. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.